if the disciples thought about iPads and iPhones when they were sitting on the Sea of Galilee? Probably not. I was just thinking when we were hearing the story of Joseph the dreamer, it just occurred to me while I was sitting there, I had a dream last night myself when I was standing at the altar, and in the dream I was holding up the consecrated bread, and I had no prayer book, and I couldn't see the words, and I had no idea what I was saying, and I said something like, oh God, make this bread holy, or something like that. It was really, really funny, and I went, oh man, hopefully that doesn't happen today. I do have the prayers with me, but just funny how your unconscious works when you're asleep. But Joseph the dreamer reminds us that dreams are very biblical. I'm not going to talk about dreams today too much, apart from that little story, but I am going to talk about something that is a theme through these readings that you may have picked up or maybe not, but that's why you got me, so that's helpful. The theme is rejection today, actually. And if you've never been rejected in your life, or you've never felt rejection, that's pretty good. But actually, drawing on my sermon from last week about the human condition, I know that that's not true, because everybody goes through rejection at some stage in their life. It's part of the human condition, part of the human experience, that there will be times when we feel rejected, left out, where we feel disconnected. All of those things are talked about today in the Bible, even in the gospel, but I'm going to get to that in just a minute. What I wanted to, there's sort of two prongs to this sermon, I suppose, and the first one is really talking about some sort of an understanding of where God is in this space, which we call theology. I'll talk about that in a sec. And the other prong is the pastoral reality of these feelings, the feeling of rejection. So I want to hold both today. But as I said, these readings are tied to a theme. And they're not always obvious. You read that Joseph story, then you've got the Psalm, which is sort of about that too. Then you've got Paul talking about, you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and you will be saved. And then you've got Peter trying to walk on water. They all feel very disconnected. But I want to draw our attention to these readings because actually this is another instance of the whole Bible being the story of Jesus Christ and the story of us with Jesus as well. But all of these things are about Jesus. Even the stuff buried in the book of Genesis is about Jesus. Now, when we say the whole Bible is the story of Jesus, we're talking about something called theology, which I just mentioned a minute ago. If you've probably heard me bandy the word around a bit, but theology just means the study of God. So theos, here's your Greek for the day. Theos is Greek for God. And ology, you've got all sorts of ologies in the world, don't you? Archaeology, psychology. You've also got theology. It's the Greek for the study of something. So the study of God, theology. Now, around 130 AD, so about 130 years after the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, there was another guy, although I don't think anyone's ever called him a guy before, but here we are, called Irenaeus of Lyon. And if you've ever been to France, you'll know where Lyon is. He was one of the, what they call the church fathers. So they're these theologians, people who are writing about God in the early days of Christianity. So you've got 130 years since the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and there are people writing and talking and thinking about who this guy is, who is Jesus. Now, it's before the Nicene Creed, so they haven't really spread the spread of Christianity across the Roman Empire yet, but Irenaeus of Lyon, he said that when he read the Old Testament, which we call it today, but it's called the Hebrew Scriptures, and he read the story of Jesus and the letters of Paul, which we heard in Romans today, he said, this whole book, or these collection of books really, is the story of one person, of Jesus Christ. I like to think I came up with that idea myself, but there are no new ideas in theology these days. We just build on other theologians. Theologians call Irenaeus' thinking, and just bear with me here, recapitulation theology. Now, you're going to know that for your next trivia night. You'll sit in your trivia seat and they'll say, what was Irenaeus of Lyon's theology? And you'll say, recapitulation. And people are going, my goodness, you're a theologian. I'm only joking. You don't need to know that. But all it is just this idea that Jesus takes up the story of the world and redoes it. That's why we get the word recapitulate. So it's redone. He does it perfectly, though. See, whereas humans are imperfect, as we all know because we are one, Jesus was perfect. So he takes up the history of the world and redoes it, relives it in his life. I've said here he takes up Israel's history, and that is true because that's where we see, I guess, a microcosm of humanity. Like if you read the story of Israel, you see the story of us. Like we don't live in Israel. We're not Israeli, we're not Jewish, but it's the story of us. And Jesus says, I'm going to enter that story and I'm going to redo it. And I'm going to redo it perfectly. And I'm going to redo it with love. Let me explain. Jesus takes on the human condition, which we talked a little bit about last week. All the stuff that makes us human, the good and the bad, and makes it incredibly holy. That's what he does. He makes what we are as humans holy. It's incredibly moving. So when we see humanity failing at relationships, like we do in that story in Genesis, we see Jesus entering it later and recapitulating it, making it perfect. I'll get to that in just a sec. But if you go back to the Old Testament, you go back to Genesis, which is one book of the Old Testament, you have got several stories of relationships that are broken, of people who are just terrible at being humans to other humans. So you've got Adam and Eve, you've got the fall of man, as it's called. You've got Sarah and Hagar, who have a big fight about who Abraham is to each of them. You've got Ishmael and Isaac, who also have a big falling out. You've got Jacob and Esau, who have the biggest falling out of the Old Testament, probably. And of course, today we've got Joseph and his brothers. So his jealous brothers, Joseph and his jealous brothers. This is a story of rejection. This is a story of jealousy. This is a story of brothers being imperfect brothers. What's really interesting is that Joseph's brothers all become the tribes of Israel. So there's a brother called Reuben, there's a brother called Benjamin, there's a brother called Asher, there's a brother called Zebulun, and they're all parts of Israel later on. So God uses the brokenness, but we see this really awful story of his own brothers selling him to the Ishmaelites. So it's another broken story as well. It's a story of rejection. Now, we know that rejection today still happens. As I said, like if you've gone through your life and not felt rejected, that's a pretty good life. But we know it's not true. What Jesus entering into that does, this recapitulation, it changes what rejection is capable of doing to us, though. So it's still going to happen. That's reality. But it changes what rejection does to us. That's really, really important. See, in Genesis 37, rejection produces more rejection. So Joseph's brothers experience Jacob, or Israel as he's known now, his preferential love to his other son is a real wounding moment for them. So Joseph is beloved, which means we are not loved. And so that's why you get that jealousy going on. So there's this cycle, isn't there, in this story? You know, I experience myself as unwanted. I perceive you as the favored one. I reject you, therefore you are wounded, and the family continues to fracture, because it certainly does. It's an old human story. And I hear it as part of my role as parish priest. You hear that story all the time. Just coming into contact with people, because it's what happens in human life. But as Christians, we see what Jesus does with it. So he doesn't just leave it there to wound us. He does something with it. So take us to the cross, which is not in our readings today, but we're here because of the cross. It's the ultimate rejection story, isn't it? So Christ goes to the cross, he's rejected by his own people, and dies and rises again. But, he does die on the cross. But what he doesn't do is allow this rejection to become resentment, to become retaliation, to become further rejection. Can you imagine if Jesus was on the cross and said, rightio, you want to play this game? We can play this game. Could just annihilate everybody with armies of angels, which they do say to him, if you are the Son of God, come off the cross. And he could easily do it, but he doesn't. He says, suffering and love is reconciliation. So he doesn't use this rejection to fracture more. It's about bringing together and about love. So Jesus takes this ancient human pattern into himself and changes it. That's what recapitulation is. He says, I see that story in Genesis and I make it into love. It is crazy to think about. So what that means for us is that human rejection, other people's rejection of us, is going to happen or has happened. It means that it's not God's verdict on you. People can think whatever they want, and they're going to. But it doesn't change what God thinks about you. And that Romans reading clicks together with Matthew's gospel quite well, word for word in a way. Because Romans, Paul says, no one who believes in Jesus will be put to shame, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And then you get Matthew, who shows Peter doing exactly that thing. Lord, save me. Call on the name of the Lord. Lord, save me. And Jesus does, and it says, immediately. Jesus immediately. There's a word in Greek for that too, which escapes me, but it means it was right away. Jesus didn't hesitate. And he does say to him, why did you doubt? But I can see him saying it with a smile. Why did you doubt? It's not a condemnation. It's just a reminder that you aren't rejected. You aren't rejected. So have you ever thought these readings were not connected? Think again. Think about what Peter experienced. Peter didn't succeed in walking on water. He failed at walking on water, and Jesus did not reject him. So Matthew reminds us that there is a divine hand that reaches down and pulls us up. That rejection doesn't have the last say in our lives. I love Christianity, which is probably a good thing because that's what I do for a living. I am a professional Christian. But I wouldn't love it if it just said to me, cheer up, everything's fine. And Christianity doesn't do that. C.S. Lewis says, if you want a religion to make you feel really good, I don't recommend Christianity. Because Christianity says rejection exists. It really does. And it stings. And it hurts. And it's brutal. But it then says, Christ takes it into himself and changes what it can do. That God is able to take even rejection and redeem it. Jesus says, human rejection doesn't change how I see you. It doesn't matter what people think. It matters what God thinks. It matters what God thinks about us. And that's the truth of Christianity. Because if it was just a really cheerful, fun kind of thing, I'd be like, no, there's not a lot of body to this. There's not a lot of truth in it. But the truth is that it takes that rejection and recapitulates it. That Christ redeems even rejection. Friends, in the hardest times of your life, if they've already come or they're on their way, when rejection or the other stings of life befall you, and all you are able to pray is, Lord, save me, then let that be your prayer. Amen.